Hello everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar on Ipieca-IOGP Biodiversity Action Plan Guidance Case Study Sharing. My name is Christy Lowe, and I'm the Manager of Environment in Ipieca. Before we begin, we wanted to cover a few housekeeping items. At the bottom of your screen are multiple application widgets that you can use. All the widgets are resizable and movable, so feel free to move them around to get the most out of your desktop space. You can expand your slide area or maximize it to full screen by clicking on the arrows on the top right-hand corner. If you have any questions during the webcast, you can submit them through the Q&A widget. We will try to answer these questions during the webcast, but if a fuller answer is needed or we run out of time, it will be answered later via email. Please note that we do capture all questions. You can also direct your question to a specific speaker if you want to by typing the name or their company. A copy of the Ipieca-IOGP BAP guidance document is available in the resource list. We encourage you to download the BAP guidance either here on the resource list or on the Ipieca or IOGP websites. For the best viewing experience, we recommend closing any programs or browser sessions running in background so that these could be causing issues. Webinars are bandwidth insensitive, so closing any unnecessary browser tabs will help conserve your bandwidth. Some networks cause slides to advance more slowly than the others, so logging off your VPN is recommended. If your slides are behind, please refresh the page. You can find additional answers to some common technical issues located in the Help widget at the bottom of your screen. An on-demand version of the webcast will be available approximately 1 day after the webcast and can be accessed using the same audience link that was sent to you earlier. Today, we're delighted to have 5 biodiversity and ecosystem services working group members with us to share their case studies related to biodiversity action plans. We will first hear from Gustavo Estrada about the case from ENI Ghana on deciding if a BAP is mandatory, necessary, or recommended. Then we will hear from Ram Narayan on ExxonMobil Papua New Guinea's LNG project and the importance of stakeholders' engagement and partnership. A brief Q&A session for around 5 minutes will follow, so please put your questions for our first 2 speakers in the Q&A widget. After the Q&A session, we will hear from Pauline McDonald about TotalEnergies Teranga project, and then from Jane Mauro from Petrobras on gaslit pole conservation actions for the Brazilian Atlantic forest. Both these case studies will be around BAP scoping. And last but not least, we will have Willie Stout from ConocoPhillips sharing with us the case study on local sharp-tailed grouse habitats and mitigation in North Dakota. We'll then wrap up the webinar with another Q&A session towards the end. So without further ado, we will invite our first speaker, Gustavo from ENI, to share the offshore Cape 3-Point project and its relevance to BAPs. So over to you, Gustavo.
Thank you, Christy. So first of all, hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. First of all, I'd like to thank Ipieca for the invitation and to all of you who decided to dedicate some time to hear about the updated BAP guidance and also the case studies embedded in it. Well, my name is Gustavo Estrada. I am the Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services Manager for ENI Natural Resources, and I'm here today to present the case study number 1, ENI Ghana Offshore Cape 3-Point Project, deciding if a BAP is mandatory, necessary, or recommended. Please, next, Christy. Here you can find the presentation agenda. I'm going to start with an introduction, which will be pretty much a brief project description to set the operational context. Then I'm gonna go straight to the key point of this case study, which is deciding if a BAP is mandatory, necessary, or recommended, based on the criteria proposed by the updated BAP guidance. After that, I will share more details around this particular BAP, including its objectives, application of the mitigation hierarchy, as well as lessons learned and recommendations deriving from 7 years of implementation in the field. Next. So ENI, through its subsidiary in ENI Ghana, operates the offshore Cape 3-Point block located 55 kilometers off the coast of Western Ghana. Production of non-associated gas is achieved via a FPSO and transported via a pipeline to a onshore receiving facility and onto Ghana's national grid. The onshore receiving facility is located in a 96 concession set within the populated coastal margin of the Amanzuri wetland, which qualifies as a key biodiversity area due to its importance for migrating seabirds who gather in large numbers to feed. Other threatened biodiversity includes 3 species of sea turtles, the critically endangered hooded vulture, and the natural habitat of the wetland forest itself. Developed with the support of the World Bank, it has a strategic relevance. Gas from the OCTP project can help Ghana shift from oil-fueled power generation to a cleaner power source. Next, please. So maybe this is indeed a very good example of BAP developed in response to all 3 drivers described in the BAP guidance. So with regards to driver number 1, hence legal, regulatory, planning, and permitting or third-part requirements, well, because the project was supported by the World Bank, it had to comply with the environmental and social standards set by the bank. But in particular, with the Performance Standard 6, which requires a BAP to projects located in critical habitats and is recommended for high-risk projects in natural habitats. Driver number 2, presence of significant observed or predicted biodiversity impacts. Well, we have in this project the recognition of the presence of threatened species, the location within a key biodiversity area, and the presence of a natural habitat. Driver number 3, corporate drivers, business benefits, and the business case for BAP. This project had to comply also with our own company BES policy, which specifically involves identifying BES values, applying the mitigation hierarchy, assessing risk and opportunity, and developing a BAP to minimize risks and maximize opportunities in BES management. Next one. So in compliance with companies' BES policy and the IFC performance standards, the project set performance objectives for 4 priority biodiversity features. So first of all, no net loss for nesting sea turtles. We have within the project area, the area of influence of the project, 3 species of sea turtles nesting in the shoreline. So the olive ridley, the leatherback, and the green turtle. Second objective was net gains for 2 migratory shorebirds, the ones triggering the KBA, the key biodiversity area, a sanderling, and a royal tern. Third objective, no net loss for the local hooded vulture population. And finally, no net loss for natural habitats. In this case, the wet swamp forest that runs north-south through the onshore receiving facility area. 3 specific BAPs were developed by ENI with the assistance of its global biodiversity partner, Fauna and Flora, named Sea Turtle BAP, Avian Species BAP, and Natural Habitats BAP. These were annexed to Ghana's Biodiversity Management Plan, which itself is a component of the Environmental, Social, and Health Management Plan developed for the project. Next one. The application of the mitigation hierarchy during development focused on impact prevention on priority species through temporal, spatial avoidance and minimization. In particular, disruption to species were avoided by scheduling construction work outside of the peak migration or nesting seasons. In addition, the clearing of natural habitats was reduced to less than 10 hectares through careful arrangement of infrastructure. Next one. Habitat restoration commenced immediately following construction and continues throughout the concession area. It is expected to deliver over 32 hectares of restored natural habitat by the end of the project. In this picture, we can see the beachfront during the construction phase, and then below in the bottom after following restoration activities. Next one. Likewise, here we see the beginning of the restoration works on coastal strand forests following construction. Then it's important also to add that swamp forests were mostly avoided, but for the very limited area that has been lost, restoration is ongoing, although solutions to fully remove some physical barriers are still being evaluated. Next slide. Although now in production phase, the project continues to monitor shorebird numbers and undertakes nightly beach patrols during the turtle nesting season to identify sea turtle nests and, if necessary, relocate these to purpose-built hatcheries for safe incubation. Here you can see two examples of monitoring results. At the top, the average monthly high season shorebird count for KBA trigger sanderling. In general, the results mostly reflect natural interannual variation and no evidence of significant effects on the shoreline populations close to the project site compared to those in the control site during the peak of operational disturbance. While these monitoring results can help to identify if there are any significant changes in population and seasonal migration with regards to the KBA trigger species, demonstrating net gain is far more challenging as the key threats to these species occur within their breeding sites in Northern Europe as well as throughout their migration routes. Therefore, we are now evaluating the possibility of monitoring these populations with GPS tags and geolocators. Below, we can see the successful nesting rate observed during nesting surveys. The rationale is that disturbance related to illumination and noise from the onshore receiving facility, but also due to regular activities of the local communities, could increase the number of false crawls and hence decrease the percentage of successful nesting events. The results indicate very limited difference between the peak operational disturbance and the baseline, which could be due to noise and illumination control measures implemented by the project. From 2020 on, an increase in successful nesting rate seems to reflect, to some extent, the community engagement and educational actions promoted through the BAP, as well as the beach patrol activities. Please, next one. In this slide, we summarize the key factors for the design and application of this BAP. So first of all, partnerships with both local and international specialists. Secondly, the integration of the BAP into the environmental, social, and health management plan, which ensures the management and control of activities within the BAP are subject to the same internal management and compliance assurance processes as any other health, safety, and environmental aspects of the project. Then, stakeholder engagement. In this case, any onshore facilities are located in the Sanzule community area. Hence, community and stakeholder engagement is an essential ongoing activity, not only in support of the BAP, but also for many other activities and, of course, to address eventual grievances. And lastly, continuous improvement through monitoring, evaluation, and learning. So in this regard, we have, for example, monitoring results informing BAP updates, since the beginning, and we have also introduced new technologies for data recording, like this Survey 123 app we have developed, and will continue to update the technology used for monitoring activities as it becomes available. Next one, please. So before I close this presentation, I'd like to synthesize the main lessons learned and recommendations deriving from this map. First of all, plan early to understand what data requirements may be necessary throughout the life cycle of the operations in order to meet your biodiversity objectives. Systematic and iterative application of the mitigation hierarchy can significantly reduce residual impacts. Preparing separate BAPs for each biodiversity feature group, although unusual, has been generally advantageous by simplifying implementation. However, additional coordination may be required, for example, for scheduling stakeholder engagement activities. Partnerships with local and international specialists are required to ensure achievement of performance objectives. However, if issues exist, don't be afraid to change implementing partners. We did that in this BAP, and it was definitely worthwhile. Habitat restoration should commence as soon as possible after impacts and be closely monitored throughout the restoration period. Next one. I'd like to thank the audience for the attention, and also the team in Enigana and in our headquarters in charge for this project, and as well as all partners involved in its implementation, starting from fauna and flora. Thank you. Over to you, Christy.
Thank you very much, Gustavo. Then next up, we will have Ram Narayan from ExxonMobil to talk about EM's Papua New Guinea's LNG project. So over to you, Ram.
Thank you very much, Christy. I hope you can hear me well. That's it. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening for all of you who have joined this Ipieca-IOGP webinar on Biodiversity Action Plan. My many thanks to Ipieca-IOGP in providing this opportunity to present about the case study from our affiliate in Papua New Guinea, and most of all, my thanks to our team in ExxonMobil affiliate in Papua New Guinea for allowing me to represent them and discuss this case study on their behalf. I'm currently in the role of environmental advisor and principal for land and habitat at ExxonMobil Corporation at our corporate Global Operations and Sustainability Organization based in Houston. And today, my case study I'm going to present is from the ExxonMobil PNG Limited, highlighting the importance of stakeholder engagement in the development of the project's biodiversity strategy, management, and implementation plan, and the efforts towards capacity building towards implementing the biodiversity-related programs. There's a lot to cover in a short time, but I'll try my best to honor the allocated time slot. A brief introduction about the PNG LNG project, and then I'll briefly introduce our biodiversity strategy before we get into the stakeholder engagement. As many of you may be aware, the PNG LNG project is located in the country of Papua New Guinea, and the project is an integrated development commercializing gas reserves operated by ExxonMobil PNG, or EMPNG in short, a subsidiary of ExxonMobil Corporation on behalf of co-venture partners. The production operations include upstream gas production and processing facilities, 700 kilometers of onshore and offshore pipelines, and liquefaction facility with the capacity to produce about more than 8 million tons of LNG annually. The operations commenced back in 2014. The PNG LNG project's facilities have been constructed in two geographical areas, mainly the upstream area and the LNG plant and marine facilities areas. Moving on to the drivers for the biodiversity strategy and what were the expectations from here. The country of Papua New Guinea, due to its location in the tropics and its various topography, is considered to be one of the global biodiversity hotspots. It has one of the highest diversity of flora and fauna, with a high incidence of endemic species, with a high number of them considered as vulnerable, endangered, or critically endangered. Many areas where the project traverses are considered as critical habitats as per criteria defined in the International Finance Corporation's Environmental and Social Performance Standard number 6. EMPNG recognizes the importance of nurturing and protecting this unique environment, which led us to development of the EMPNG biodiversity strategy and the supporting implementation plan in the form of the Biodiversity Implementation and Monitoring Program, or the BIMP. We could call the BIMP biodiversity strategy another form of the biodiversity action plans. And also, one of the reasons for this strategy was actually to meet the expectations of the company policies on protecting our environment and meet the external expectations related to biodiversity set by the project finance lenders and the national government, PNG national government's biodiversity strategy and policies. As you would expect, the development and implementation of the biodiversity strategy was heavily shaped by early and sustained stakeholder engagement. Stakeholder engagement on this project started in 2010, formally and in an informal way, about its biodiversity strategy and BIMP, and has been ongoing since then. The strategy has been updated to incorporate information acquired from stakeholders and through construction and post-construction assessments. Some of the key stakeholders involved are the PNG government, mainly through the Conservation and Environmental Policy Authority, or the CEPA, and provincial and local level governments. We also engage with the national and international NGOs, both in the country and outside the country, with the academic institutions in Papua New Guinea through their universities, and of course, most importantly, the relevant communities, which are either directly or in the indirect area of influence for the project. The stakeholder engagements informed us to identify biodiversity values at various spatial scales. Mainly in this case was categorized as large, medium, and small. We'll talk more about that briefly in the subsequent slides. The engagement also informed us to identify the ecosystem services, i.e., example, the use of resources by the local people, and also for cultural and or spiritual values. It informed us to develop implementation, management, and monitoring plans through the application of the risk management mitigation hierarchy, including biodiversity offset programs for compensation for significant residual impacts. It helps us communicate results of the biodiversity implementation monitoring program and may also for capacity building. Let's briefly touch upon those about topics in the following slides. Let me give you a brief introduction about the strategy. The strategic approach in biodiversity management for EMPNG was based on identifying the biodiversity values in the upstream areas as informed by the previous biodiversity studies conducted in the country, the project pre-construction surveys, and other research information obtained through stakeholder engagement. At large scale, it includes the large expanses of intact tropical forests in the upstream areas, which have high floral and faunal biodiversity and species endemicity, and their importance to local communities for resources and or cultural and spiritual purposes. At the medium scale, the priority ecosystems deemed to have high biodiversity values were identified, such as high altitude and montane forests, and the Lake Kutubu, which is listed as a Ramsar wetland. At the smaller levels, at a smaller scale, focal habitats and significant ecological features were identified for the biodiversity values. These include caves and pinnacles, which provide important habitats for bats, upland streams and sinkhole swamps, providing habitats for certain frogs and birds, lacking trees or grounds for birds, lowland riverine areas with high value conservation swamps, and mangroves. The biodiversity strategy was developed with its goals and objectives as shown in this slide. As you can see, it's mainly focusing on area-based conservation initiatives, which included maintaining the intactness of areas with high biodiversity value, such as the upstream area, conserving priority ecosystems, and protecting focal areas. It also prioritized strengthening existing protected areas in PNG, being consistent with national conservation priorities in the country, and finally, making it a community-owned and managed with active participation of landowners for long-term sustainment. As indicated earlier, EMPNG developed a biodiversity offset program based on the following guiding principles, which were developed in consultation with stakeholders. As you would notice, the three boxes highlighted in the red indicates how engagement with different types of stakeholders is inextricably involved for the successful implementation of the sustained biodiversity offset program. Moving on, a little bit more details on our ongoing engagement with the stakeholders. Ongoing engagement with the communities have been critical for the implementation of the project's biodiversity offset program. We will discuss an example of a successful result of ongoing sustained engagement. One of EMPNG's biodiversity offset program components is establishing new protected areas in the upstream area that are representative of the biodiversity values affected by PNG LNG. One of the candidate sites have been in the lower Kikori River area in the River Delta region. The sustained engagement approach with the local communities in the lower Kikori River Delta over the years has resulted in behavioral changes in the communities, with residents and local fishers gaining a greater understanding of the importance of conservation. Some of the communities are now ready to establish conservation deeds, and other communities continue to show interest in joining conservation programs and dedicating land for conservation activities. As you can see, there were about 18 communities through which we conducted resource mapping to inform the establishment of the new protected areas. 11 of them are now ready to establish the conservation areas. And there are a few other communities who are seriously considering joining these programs. An important component of the stakeholder consultation program in EMPNG has been the affiliates' commitment to sharing the biodiversity information that has been collected as part of these engagement process, even for developing the biodiversity strategy or the implementation plans, and the results of the implementation plans has been to share the biodiversity information with the communities engaged. So they get a sense of ownership in this one. So the information is shared in various forms, including books, posters, videos, and even immersive technologies. Moving on to capacity building. It was identified as a key component in sustaining the biodiversity offset program that we have in place there. As you would see in the image below, the components 1, 2, and 3 of the biodiversity offset programs identified as enabling activities, which are shown in dark green color, focus on capacity building at the national and regional levels to enable the foundation for sustained conservation outcomes on the ground, which are represented on the right by the light green colors, which are components 4 and 5. Capacity building activities implemented by EMPNG to sustain the biodiversity programs can be broadly categorized into 5, and these are actually listed here. They are internal EMPNG, dealing with specialist consultants, biodiversity conservation stakeholders, PNG government, and the local communities. Internally, the capacity building activities focused on strengthening in-house capacity of the PNG biodiversity advisors through training and exposure to national and international networks and concepts. When you work with specialty consultants outside EMPNG, it helps to foster growth and training of the next generation PNG specialist consultants to support national content efforts in the biodiversity surveys and monitorings. We have been in the past within the affiliate been using external consultants for our biodiversity surveys and monitorings, which also included members from our local communities. PNG biodiversity conservation stakeholders. Working with them enhances the conservation capacity in the entire country of PNG through support of dedicated educational programs, strengthens the network of community-based conservation, support the sharing of ideas and lessons learned for the PNG community-based conservation efforts. We also work with the PNG government in supporting and sharing of ideas and enabling exposure to international networks and concepts to establish and strengthen policies for environmental protection and the management of protected areas. With the local communities, the way it works is that it helps us to provide awareness to local communities about the EMP&G, the company's biodiversity offset program, and opportunities for conservation. It helps us provide support and education on the establishment of community-based conservation areas, which are very critical for the successful of our biodiversity strategy as well as the biodiversity offset programs. It provides support and education on the establishment of community-based conservation areas, as I talked about earlier, enables us and empowers communities to effectively manage their conservation areas and monitor the conservation value. It also helps in bridging community efforts with the wider conservation strategies for the community and for the country. Building the technical capacity of conservation professionals and community capacity through the EMP&G Enhancing Conservation Capacity programs expands on Papua New Guinea's existing strengthening conservation capacity programs. The below image shows one of the outcome of the ECCP program, the Enhancing Conservation Capacity program, where 42 community conservation practitioners are graduating with certificates in biodiversity conservation. This was back in 2019. So to recap, the importance of stakeholder engagement cannot be stressed more. For us to ensure the long-term success of biodiversity-related activities requires any company to understand not just the biological and ecological features of the project or the host country, but it is equally important to understand the interactions and the characteristics of the human and institutional context of the area. And this is typically represented by stakeholders at the project site or area. The stakeholder engagement is most effective when initiated early and sustained over time, with open lines of communication being maintained with the key stakeholders. As we saw earlier, the benefits of early stakeholder engagement includes identifying relevant data, relevant biodiversity-related data, gaining greater understanding of impacts and wider pressures on biodiversity features, developing trust, that's pretty important in my opinion, and identifying potential delivery partners or projects. And identifying the right stakeholders as part of your biodiversity action plan or biodiversity management plan during the scoping process can improve and speed up the preparation and implementation of a BAP or a BMP. Thank you very much for the time. And now back to Christy for the next part of the webinar. Thanks, Christy.
Great, thank you very much, Ram. And we will now have a quick round of Q&A. The first question will be addressed to Gustavo. So Gustavo, could you please explain why do you set only no net loss for natural habitat and not net positive impacts?
Yeah, so thank you very much for the question. So basically, in line with the World Bank, with the IFC Farmer Standard 6 standards and guidance to which this project had to comply with, as it has been funded also by the World Bank, but also in compliance with our own any biodiversity and ecosystem services policy. In all projects, we currently implement a risk-based approach and seek to achieve no net loss for natural habitats and net gains for critical habitats. In our case, the only area in this project qualifying as critical habitat was the KBA, the Amansuri Wetland KBA. Therefore, we committed to achieving net gains for the species triggering the KBA. So that's pretty much the rationale behind it. I hope I fully answered the question.
Thank you, Gustavo. And then we have a question for Ram. So Ram, what strategy do you use to implement the initiatives agreed upon?
Right. If you remember, as part of the stakeholder engagement plan, as part of the stakeholder engagement, we have been talking to the relevant stakeholders right at the government level, at the NGOs, and also at the relevant communities right from the beginning. So it helped that actually to identify all the biodiversity values and the ecosystem services. So based on which we were able to develop identify the biodiversity values, develop the implementation and the management and the monitoring plans. So, and then our strategy was to actually incorporate all the input that we got from the stakeholders into these plans, including the monitoring plans, and involve the communities as and needed wherever it's possible, by involving them in the implementation and execution of these programs. And for that, that's why we had identified capacity building as one of our key pillars. So if you remember, we talked about those 5 pillars for our offset programs, for which capacity building was identified one of the key areas. So it helped us, identify who would be able to help us in implementing these programs from our local communities. We developed programs to educate them and to develop their capacities in contributing to those monitoring programs. And also, we were able to build awareness within the communities towards the benefit of conservation, and which in turn helped them support not just our projects goals and objectives from a biodiversity protection perspective, but also the local communities and the local, provincial, and the government level. So there was overall a win-win situation for us in this case. I hope I was able to answer that question.
Thank you very much, Ram. And I think that is time to move on to our next presentation. And just to remind everyone that if you have a question, please utilize the Q&A box, and we will be able to capture every question that you ask. And unfortunately, we have run out of time for this Q&A session. So we will now move on to our next presentation from Pauline from Total Energies. And we will try to get back to any unanswered questions either by email or towards the end of the session. So over to you, Pauline.
Thank you very much, Christy. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. I would just like to extend my thanks to Ipieca for reaching out to us to share some experience feedback from our project, which is called Tilenga Project. So this is an integrated project development that is located in Western Uganda. And also thank you to all of you who are taking part in this webinar today. So my part of the webinar is really focusing on the biodiversity action scoping phase. So it's really focused around what sort of criteria we use to trigger the BAP, but also in developing the BAP. I'm also going to talk a little bit about how we defined the geographical scope, and then moving on to more detailed information regarding defining the actual role of the BAP, and also a little bit around how we developed the structure of the BAP, and also the temporal scope for each of the BAP elements. So I shall move on to the next slide. So a little bit about Lake Albert. So Lake Albert is located in northwestern Uganda. There is an integrated development project ongoing. So there are 3 parts to this project. The first is the upstream part, which is really 2 developments. So we have the Tilenga oil project. So this is Total Energies operated, but we have a partnership with Chinese National Oil Company and also the Uganda National Oil Company. So it's a network of well pads connected to a central processing facility, and then we also have a feeder pipeline to take the oil to a refinery located in a city called Hoima. We also have the Kingfisher project, which is developed by our partners. That's Chinese National Offshore Oil Company. So again, we're joint venture partners, and their development is further down the Albertine region. And it's a network of 4 well pads also connected to the central processing facility located in Hoima. We also have a midstream part. So we have the East African crude oil pipeline. So this is a 1,400 kilometer underground pipeline, which will take the fluids from the main processing area in Uganda all the way to the shore of Tanzania, the east coast of Tanzania, for onward transportation. So this project is large scale, and we had applied, or we had committed to applying the IFC performance standards on environment and social sustainability on this project. So in terms of the biodiversity of the North Albertine Rift, so really when we were looking at defining the criteria and triggers for the BAP, in our case, it was really a case of looking at the study area. So the North Albertine Rift has been studied extensively by different agencies, and it's globally recognized for its unique and rich biodiversity. So our area of influence is predominantly considered to be critical habitat. There's over 39 protected areas. We have, to the north, we have the Murchison Falls National Park, which is a Category 2 IUCN park. We also have the Murchison Falls Albert Delta Wetland System, which is a Ramsar site, wetland of international importance. We also have a number of wildlife reserves that are surrounding the park. And we also have a forest corridor, which is critical habitat for eastern chimpanzees. So in all, it hosts a range of emblematic wildlife, including a number of critical habitat qualifying species. So in terms of defining the scope of the BAP, and particularly the criteria, it was fairly straightforward in our case in that we were working in critical habitat. So we had set out to achieve no net loss, net gain to critical, well, no net loss to natural habitat and net gain in critical habitat. So we focused on the priority biodiversity, which is Murchison Falls National Park. We also had the key savanna corridors, which contain very important savanna type grasslands, moist and dry. And we also focused on the wetland area, the Murchison Falls Albert Delta, and the tropical high forest and riverine forested areas within this region. So in terms of the considerations in developing the plan, so as I mentioned, we had triggered PS6 because of the critical habitat qualifying species. We also were aware that the project was likely to have fairly significant residual impacts within the landscape at landscape scale. This was fragmentation and in-migration effects. So the area that we are working in is under a lot of pressure already in terms of human development and human activities. So we had predicted that we would have some significant residual impacts that would need to be addressed by the Biodiversity Action Plan. We were also helped by the fact that Uganda has developed its biodiversity policy pretty much in tandem with the project, and some of my colleagues here in Uganda have been inherently involved in developing the policy framework, which culminated in the coming into force of the Environment Act, which actually does, it's very explicit in terms of projects operating within critical habitat, and it's written into the legislation of the country that a net gain has to be achieved for biodiversity for those types of projects. I think the main challenge for us was to design an action plan to address the impacts. Because our impacts are at landscape scale, we realised that we had to design an offset mechanism to address those thoroughly, and in particular be able to achieve measurable ecological compensation actions in line with the IFC performance standard. So there was a lot of discussion around the geographical scope for this, which is fairly large. But also we had to demonstrate quite clearly that we would be able to offset within this landscape. So those were all partially considered during the early phases of the scoping. And I would like to echo the points made by my previous speakers around the fact that we have to work in partnership within this landscape to achieve these conservation objectives. So basically, we had a very long process when we were designing the BAP. So it started back in, well, for Total Energies, it started back in 2012 when we did the initial baseline studies. And then moving on from there, there was the critical habitat assessment work that was done, and also extensive habitat mapping from 2014 to 2016. I should say that the BAP for our project was developed by leading international experts, but also we had oversight and input from our colleagues within our headquarters branch, but also we made the decision very early on to bring on board an independent panel of experts from various different organizations. Some of them come from the NGO world, and some come from local expertise within Uganda and also within Tanzania. We also developed it with some input from other industries that have actually implementing offsets at a large scale. So it was a very lengthy process. So we started with the critical habitat assessment. We then moved into the ESIA process itself, and then we did some pre-feasibility studies around, well, if we're looking to achieve net gain in this landscape, how can it be done, and what sort of opportunities are available for us? So that did involve a huge amount of consultation, particularly with the NGOs working in the area, conservation organizations. We also did a huge consultation with the government of Uganda, moving all the way from national agencies through to district level and local level government as well. As part of that, we also had extensive consultation with civil society as part of the activity. So I would like to echo the comments made, is that stakeholder engagement has an ongoing process. It started very early for us, and it still continues now that we're in the implementation phase. So in terms of defining the scope of the action plan, there are a few key elements that we looked at. The first thing was securing the commitment, particularly a commitment from the company, and also setting clear objectives over the development life is key. So we had said very early that this is a 25-year development. Therefore, from the outset, the Biodiversity Action Plan is going to be done over that period, obviously to ensure that gains will last long into the future, hopefully. It also has to be aligned with broader conservation objectives. And our experience is that they're more likely to succeed, these types of biodiversity action plans where you're offsetting in landscapes. They're more likely to succeed if it is aligned with protected area plans and also more general conservation objectives for the particular ecosystems that you're working in. And also, as I mentioned earlier, continuous engagement, development of long-term partnerships with conservation groups, with NGOs and with communities is really important. So in terms of the temporal scope, we had split our BAP into two. So we have an overarching biodiversity and ecosystem services action plan. And then on one side, we're really focused on management of direct impacts through specific management plans, which are to be implemented by the contractors who are working on the project. So it covers things like invasive species management, site clearance, wetlands management. So we have a suite of management plans that are really focused on managing the direct footprint impacts, which are implemented by our contractors. And then on the other side, we have the net gain implementation plan, which is really the offset for the project. And then we have the monitoring and evaluation plan. So really that's how we have designed our plan to cover both the direct impacts and also the indirect and cumulative effects that we predict will be residual as a result of our project. And just my last slide is really just to focus on the offset itself. So this is a landscape-wide offset. It's quite unusual in that it's an outcome-based approach within the landscape. So we decided to focus on 4 key ecosystems of priority importance. So our first area is really focused on Murchison Falls National Park, and we have a target to reduce human pressures and support Murchison Falls Park resources, improving park management, being able to combat illegal activities, with the overall objective, the measurable outcome being that we're able to increase the population of critical habitat qualifying species such as lion and elephant, but also to maintain the population of other species within this landscape, including the giraffe and some of the other animals such as the hartebeest and the Uganda kob. Our second area that we're focused on is on the Bugungu Wildlife Reserve. So the approach is very similar, but it's really to manage any pressures from in-migration on savanna habitat, which includes addressing threats in and around the wildlife reserve. Our third ecosystem is really on the wetlands. So we're focused on helping to build resilient wetland ecosystems for biodiversity and people through community-based management. And the fourth is conserving and restoring forests and forest connectivity. So we have targets related to protection of the existing forest corridor that remains. So these forest units that are critical habitat for chimpanzee, but also looking to restore in partnership with other organizations some of the forest fragments that have been lost over time. So the general approach is really a landscape one. So we're focused on working together with our partners. So our partners for the development, but also in partnership with the government, mandated institutions, and also the conservation organizations who are operating in this landscape. So for us, the partnership approach is key. In order to ensure that we have long-lasting gains within this landscape, or we at least set the scene for achieving these long-lasting gains in the landscape. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for listening. I'll hand back to Christy now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pauline. And then next up, we will have Jane Mauro from Petrobras to share with us the Gaslit Pool Biodiversity Action Plan. So over to you, Jane.
Thank you very much, Christy. Thank you all, and it's very happy to be here to share our experience in developing a biodiversity action plan for Gaslit Pool that leading to conservation actions for the Brazilian Atlantic forest. So just let me introduce Petrobras. I'm a biodiversity advisor working at the environmental management of Petrobras. Petrobras is a public health corporation operating in an integrated manner in the oil, natural gas, and energy industry. And our vision is to be best diversified and integrated energy company in generating value, building a more sustainable world, reconciling the focus on oil, gas, with diversification into low carbon businesses, sustainability, safety, respect for the environment, and total attention to people. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So as you may know, Brazil is the most biological diverse country in the world, and most of Petrobras operations occur in Brazil. We are a mega diverse country We have over 700 new animal species being described each year, and thousands of protected areas that comprise 19% of our territory and 27% of our marine areas. But however, we have over 1,000 endangered species in Brazil, 2 biodiversity hotspots, one in the central area, which is the Brazilian savanna, the Cerrado, and another one, the Atlantic forest, which is around the coastline. We also have more than 200 indigenous ethnic groups. So working with social environmental responsibility is key. Since we have interaction with protected areas, endangered species, sensitive habitats, even there's a lot of fauna interaction within our units, and we have a very restricted environmental regulation in the country. Well, our ESG strategy, defined in our last strategic plan, has 4 pillars, which are care for people, act with integrity, reduce our carbon footprint, and protect the environment. Within the environment realm, we have water security. We focus on water security, circular economy, biodiversity enhancement, and also prevention and mitigation of accidents, spills, and environmental impacts. So we aim at having gains in biodiversity. We have a commitment to reach in 2030 an increase of the number of species protected, of the area recovered and conserved, and of the environmental protected areas where we promote the strengthening of its management. And this is being done through voluntary projects through our Petrobras social environmental program. But we also have the goal of having 100% of all our facilities with biodiversity action plans. So what I'm describing here is the development of BAPs for installations that are already in place, not for new projects. Where there are many elements within this goal, such as testing methodologies and to evaluate, to assess net impact, searching for net gain of vegetated areas, and developing specific fauna management plans for wildlife. So the premises we use to develop our BAPs, which are under development, they are first to be technical scientific based, then aligned with Ipieca guidelines and other national international requirements and guidelines, such as IFC, to have a geographic interaction for the units located in the same context, and to aim at biodiversity and ecosystem services enhancement. These are the steps of our methodology that was developed together with a Brazilian consultancy. So first, since the projects are already there, we analyze all data already generated for the project, biodiversity data and information, and from other sources. We visit the site. We describe the interactions of the operations within all this context of this social environmental context described. We define the study area. Then we map all protected areas according to Brazilian legislation, but also Ramsar sites, World Heritage sites, IBAs, and KBAs. We establish our baseline using the data already generated and produced by other sources. And then we define our target species, our critical habitats, evaluate, analyze, identify the impacts of the operations, direct, indirect, effective, potential, and analyze the biodiversity actions that are already in place, which in general there are many biodiversity actions already developed by our units. And then we have a discussion and define the actions and targets, and all the data, they feed a database, integrated database. So talking about the Gasloop Pole, it's located in Rio de Janeiro, around the Guanabara Bay, which is a highly urbanized bay. One side of the bay, you have Rio de Janeiro city. In the other side, you have Niterói, but also many other cities nearby. and the yellow figure is the gas loop pole that's located more anthropic rural area. So the site comprises 45 square kilometers, and the first activity will be the processment of natural gas coming from the pre-salt layer from the Santos Basin. But it will be expanded, and there will be the establishment of industrial condominium. So it's located in the Atlantic forest biome, surrounded by some small agriculture and livestock production, but there are also protected areas, relevant river basins and mangroves, and the very important Guanabara Bay and local communities. We applied the mitigation hierarchy from the time the site was constructed, and through our environmental licensing process. So there are already many biodiversity actions, such as forest restoration, fauna studies, fauna management for wildlife within the site, and terrestrial and aquatic biodiversity monitoring being developed by the unit. So here's the study area that was defined for this BAP. It's composed by a 5-kilometer buffer around the gas loop limits, a 500 buffer around its effluent pipeline, and 5,000 buffer around the discharge point of the effluent that it's already treated, but still. And we have included other areas, increasing the study area that encompass protected areas nearby. So we used a local Brazilian platform, which is called Map Biomes, to map the land use of the area, but also some data developed by us specifically within the site to perform the land use mapping. And then we mapped all protected areas within the study site and nearby. After that, we established the critical habitats, which are the yellow parts of this image. So there are many critical habitats, but there are some that are more relevant in terms of area than others. And we consider critical areas, habitats, the sensitive areas, the areas with effective target species presence, significant natural areas such as large fragments of forest, for instance, and natural areas that are protected by our legislation. To define the target species, we had the list of all the species that potentially could occur there with previous studies and that were also identified. So we applied the methodology of defining the highest levels of threat, and also migratory species, rare species, species of social interest, and species that are encompassed by Brazilian national action plans for conservation, and endemic species, as well as restricted distribution species. So we made a cross-analysis of the information, considering the direct impacts, the highly significant potential aspects and impacts with the critical habitats, the target species, and considering the ongoing and completed biodiversity actions that the unit is already developing, and established the targets, the actions and targets with indicators, with the definition of the biodiversity gain relationship, the status in the mitigation hierarchy, the type of action that we classified into target species, priority ecosystems, ecosystem services, processes and flow management, and the criticality level of the action. So I clicked twice. So all the data was included in an interrelational database that will feed a specific dashboard for that unit and for all the units we're developing BAPs, and an integrated dashboard so that we can monitor the implementation of the BAP, all the BAPs, including its possible adjustments, since it's a living document, and it's important to follow up with all the actions that were established. So for the gas loophole, one of the main actions that we established was a partnership with the Instituto Ação Socioambiental. It's a very relevant NGO working here in Brazil. And the aim was to promote the reforestation of mangrove and umbrophilous forest restoration, and monitoring key ecological species that are in danger in the area, and to introduce the tapir for individuals of tapir, which is a species considered locally extinct in Rio de Janeiro state. So we expect that these actions will lead us to a contribution for the ecosystem services such as water provision, local climate regulation, artisanal fisheries, and genetic diversity. Well, it encompasses the objectives are to restore 400 hectares of priority forests, 300 hectares of mangroves, to monitor the tapir, the lowland paca, the puma, and the southern muriqui, and to reintroduce the tapir. So to conclude, we believe that developing BAPs to all our installations, including those that have already many compromises with biodiversity actions, is important. It's a good practice in terms of ESG. It will help us to answer the investors and improve our performance, the reporting performance, and identify risks, opportunities, since we will have a close look at all our installations and we'll have the chance to monitor how it goes. And it will increase the focus on biodiversity in the corporate level and also in the sites, the Petrobras sites. It will help us to optimize internal processes and increase the alignment with the ODS and the new global framework of the Biological Diversity Convention. So we think that an effective contribution to biodiversity conservation and restoration will help us to improve our relation to stakeholders, maintain our relationship with them, and generate business value for our company. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jane. And next up, we will have Willie Stout from ConocoPhillips to share with us the case on local sharp-tailed grouse habitats and migration in North Dakota. So over to you, Willie.
Thank you, Christy. Good morning, good afternoon. Thanks for the opportunity to participate in sharing our case studies that made it into the BOP update. My name is Willie Stout. I'm the Director for Water and Biodiversity in ConocoPhillips Sustainable Development Team in Houston. And the ConocoPhillips Biodiversity case study is about understanding local sharp-tailed grouse habitats and migration. Now, the study was completed for our Bakken unconventional asset, which is located in North Dakota, north central U.S. Our position in the Bakken, our lease area, is approximately 560,000 net acres. For those who prefer hectares, that's about 224,000. So it's a significant, large area. Now, for those of you with limited previous exposure to North Dakota or geographical knowledge, you may have heard about Fargo, probably the most prominent town within North Dakota due to the movie. Fargo is about 390 miles east of Williston. Okay, so now to the bird. It's all about sharp-tailed grouse. Sharp-tailed grouse are found in a variety of habitats in North Dakota. It includes grassland, mixed shrub ecosystems, and across their entire range. They are one of the three dancing grouse species, meaning that in the spring they gather at open display grounds called leks and sing and dance and mate. Now, declines in populations are generally due to habitat loss resulting from conversion of grassland and bushland. And this is largely due to agriculture, but also due to energy development. Now, importantly, the species is of low conservation concern, but it's considered an important management indicator species for the region. However, there is currently limited research on the or understanding on the potential direct or indirect effects of energy development on sharp-tailed grouse populations. That's why we commissioned the study. Overall, sharp-tailed grouse in North Dakota account for about a third of the entire population, making habitat in North Dakota important for the overall persistence of the species. One important consideration for the species is that their habitat requirements actually vary across the year. Therefore, effective conservation requires detailed understanding and local data on seasonal habitat use and movement patterns. So the overall purpose of the study is to help design our footprint to balance protection of the existing ecosystem and the sage grouse, the sharp-tailed grouse, with future land uses near our operations. Now, what I'm talking about is a 3-year study. It's actually not quite completed yet, so the analysis is ongoing, but it started in 2020. It was designed and managed by our biodiversity experts in the Lower 48 business unit, was completed by a consultant, and we have been reporting on updates in our corporate SD report. So the purpose of the study. So primary focus was to gain better understanding of the extent and the availability of 3 critical seasonal habitat types. First one is nesting, second one is late brood rearing in the summer, and the last is winter habitat. Now, there's several oil and gas wells that are being completed in the general area, and they're more proposed in the future development phases. So identifying and mapping the critical seasonal habitats and understanding local migration and movement patterns will better enable us to avoid, minimize, and mitigate potential impacts from our activities on the species. The deliverables are basically first to quantify resource selection and avoidance within the study area, to generate maps of the critical seasonal habitat at the landscape scale, and to provide information for development on project planning and the siting purposes. So a little bit about the methods. The study involved tagging both female and male sharp-tailed grouse. We collected data for 2 areas, a main study area and a reference area. Importantly, sharp-tailed grouse were found to be relatively common and widespread in both areas. We engaged 60 grouse volunteers, so to speak, 31 in 2020, additional 14 in 21, and yet additional 15 in 2022. So grouse were captured on the leks using walk-in funnel traps, and trapping locations varied year by year depended on landowner permissions to access and as well as snow conditions. So the traps were never left unattended when the doors were open. And we used transmitters weighing somewhere between 12 and 16 grams. And they were attached to the birds using a ramp mount harness. Transmitter lifespan is about 3 years. The transmitters were programmed to collect 3 to 5 locations per day. That translated in a total of over 24,000 GPS locations that were recorded over the 3-year period of the data collection. The number of locations per bird ranged from 7, which probably means that the bird got rid of its harness fairly early, to over 2,000. Here are some of the initial results, as I mentioned, where the detailed statistics are still being analyzed. But here's what we know so far. Most GPS-tagged birds remained relatively close to the nesting area and lecks where they were initially captured. The greatest distance any bird moved away from this location was about 9.8 miles, or roughly 16 kilometers. Males especially stayed close to the lek during spring and summer. And of the over 5,000 GPS location collected for male short-tailed grouse, 99.7% remained within about 1 mile or 1.6 kilometers of the lek where they were captured initially. There were some longer distances recorded for females, but the majority still remained within about 3 miles or 4.8 kilometers from their lek. So nest locations were identified using the GPS data from each of the birds. And nest locations were also confirmed with ground visits when possible. Data recorded for the nests included the clutch size, the nest fate, whether it was successful or failed, the reason for failure, and hatching success, as well as the nest vegetation type and habitat characteristics. Tagged hens nested on average within like 0.93 miles, so 1.5 kilometers from their lek. So it's all fairly tight. Early information indicates that for nesting habitat use and nest occurrence, the key criterion is elevation, followed by grassland, percent grassland in the vicinity. So grouse were more likely to place nests at higher elevation, meaning at elevations greater than 700 meters or about 2,300 feet, on ridge tops and in areas with high amounts of grassland cover. So total of 3 formal statistical analysis will be the end results. Some of them have been progressed, not all of them yet, but they will include nesting habitat characteristics and nesting habitat resource selection, female habitat use during spring and summer, and male habitat use during the lekking and the summer periods. So we believe that identifying and mapping the critical seasonal habitats and understanding local migration patterns and movement patterns will better enable us to avoid, minimize, or mitigate potential impacts of development on the species. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Willie. So now we are at our Q&A session. So a reminder that please send your questions through the Q&A box if you have any other questions to ask. And we will first go to a question for Pauline. So Pauline, the question to you is, can you please share your learnings and reflections on the independent panel of experts and NGOs?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. So this is indeed an interesting one. So obviously, we had identified the need to have some external expertise, as well as the consultancy firms who were involved in development of the BAP for Tilenga. We realised that we did need to have some independent oversight. So this committee was created in 2013. In terms of the composition, I think my main advice would be it really depends on the objectives and also the area you're working in. So for us, we wanted to make sure we had a correct balance of expertise, particularly on biodiversity, but also having livelihoods. So one of the key learnings from us is that we didn't really have enough livelihood support early on. So it's really important to get a balance between biodiversity conservation expertise, but also having that livelihoods element to make sure that there's an integrated approach. I would say that one of the other things that we learned was that we really were not able to implement a lot of the early stage recommendations that this committee had, primarily because the financing for the project was still very much uncertain. So I would say that it's really key if you are considering having a panel of expertise that you have to be prepared to hear some difficult recommendations, and often those recommendations are very hard. It's hard to get traction internally within the company if you haven't got approval, but also making sure that we meet the expectations of the committee as well. So I would say those are some of the learnings that I would share, but I definitely think it's worthwhile. And if you get the right panel of experts, you will get a lot out of such an activity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pauline. And the next question is addressed to Jane. So Jane, how are all information, data, discussions with stakeholders, etc. managed? Are there any tools or databases that Petrobras used for monitoring and evaluating the KPIs?
We are actually developing our methodology, and we're going to test this methodology to evaluate our net impact assessment throughout all our units. And we will consider, for instance, probably the gas load pole will be the first one that we will consider to evaluate how it goes, the results in terms of net impact assessment. And I think that's the other question that was here that was about, okay, 40 hectares, is it enough to achieve net gain? We will be able to answer this after we actually develop specific metrics that are reliable, that can actually deliver this answer in a scientific basis, a technical scientific basis. So I'm not sure if I answered the question, but I think that bottom line is that we are adjusting and studying and adjusting metrics that will answer this question soon.
Great. Thank you very much, Jane. And the next question is for Willie. So Willie, what are the long-term monitoring plans for the North Dakota project?
Well, thanks for the question. Well, we'll continue to monitor based on the results. So once we have the final statistical results, this information will also determine how we have to continue to monitor the species to determine whether the plan can be implemented. So the answer basically, I don't have the answer yet. It is pending the final results that will drive the decision what future monitoring will look like.
Great. Thank you, Willie. And then we are going back to Gustavo. So Gustavo, did you conduct the critical habitat assessment based on IFCPS 6 requirements?
Yes, we did. We followed the IFC PS6 requirements for critical habitat assessment. And actually, if needed, we can share with you, with the colleague who asked the question, we can share with you the methodology we use it and the results obtained by us for this project. As all documents regarding this BAP are publicly available in the IFC website. So maybe after this, the end of the webinar, we can share by email the website where you can find the detailed methodology we use it and also the results.
Thank you, Gustavo. And then we have our next question for Ram. Ram, can you please share the time frame of BAP development? How long did it take to develop BAPs based on the ExxonMobil PNG biodiversity strategy? Thank you.
It's a good question in the sense that the biodiversity strategy was developed as the project Isha was completed, based on the information that it came through. So give or take overall between the strategy and the implementation plans development, I would say about 3 years time. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Ram. And then the next question will be for Pauline. Do you think TotalEnergies could have further avoid or reduce its impacts by changing the location of the pipeline?
Thank you very much for the question. Yes, so we continue to do avoidance and reduction measures, even though the design and the construction phase has commenced. We still work on areas if we can avoid. In fact, we are constantly looking at areas where we can avoid. And in fact, the project is still looking at reducing the footprint further. So even though we're very much in the construction phase, we work closely with the engineering teams to see where we can actually reduce our footprint further and avoid sensitive areas where we possibly can. That said, practically speaking, it's maybe not always possible, but we definitely look at that as obviously in line with the mitigation hierarchy. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Pauline. And then we will ask our final question for the day. If you have any further question, please put it in the Q&A box and we will try to get back to you via email. So the last question of the session will be to Jane. So Petrobras has some BAP goals by 2025. Does it only include new sites or existing and new sites where BAPs will be applied?
Thank you for the question. Yes, it will be ongoing. Right now, we're working on developing BAPs for existing sites, but this will be extended for new projects as well. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Jane. And also on BAPs, sorry, Jane, a final question. Are all the BAPs for specific sites or projects, or is it for a particular region?
It depends. Like I said, we consider the geographic integration. So in some cases, there are units very close to each other, even in the same terrain, and then we make a single BAP. And in other cases, we develop specific for one business unit. So we do all that analysis to guide us to what would be the best solution for that region, considering obviously the integration of the biodiversity actions that are being developed from the units in that geographic context. Thank you for the question.
Great. Thank you very much, Jane. So this is the end of our webinar today. Thank you very much for everyone for your time and also your interest in the Ipieca-IOGP Biodiversity Action Plan guidance. You can visit the Ipieca website to download the full guidance document. And thank you very much also to our speakers for for kindly sharing your experiences from your companies. It is great to hear all the biodiversity efforts from all over the world. And to our audiences, a final reminder that the on-demand version of the webcast will be available approximately 1 day after the webcast, and it can be accessed using the same audience link that was sent to you earlier. So thank you very much, and see you in the next webinar. Thank you.